Okay, hello everybody. And I appreciate being here and talking about what I think is not only a fascinating baseball story about the 1932 Chicago Cubs, but it's also a terrific tale and tale of true crime intrigue, and topped off with dozens of contemporary photographs. A lot of them have never before been published either. So let me start out with September 20th, 1932. The Cubs had just clinched the National League pennant with a record of 90 wins and 64 losses, and 4 games in front of the second place Pittsburgh Pirates. Okay. Now, the Chicago Tribune was rather stunned by this accomplishment, as the Cubs had to deal with quite a few major setbacks. This was not an easy year for them. Early on, for example, it was thought that they needed help in the pitching department, but the player Lon Warneke had stepped up. He had been a rookie in 1931. He won 22 games and lost just 6 that year, had an ERA of 2.37. The mighty slugger Hack Wilson, one of the most famous Cubs of all time, Hack Wilson. He had been traded, was kind of hard to deal with, Hack Wilson, but Johnny Morris stepped up and hit 305 that year. And the Tribune reported, quote, that never before was a team beset with more irritating experiences apart from the playing of baseball. For example, there was the obvious bad blood between the Cubs president, William Beck. You Chicago folks might have heard of his son, Bill Beck, wrote the book Beck is in Wreck, the showman, who owned the White, I think he owned the White Sox at one time, but he also did some work with the Cubs too. And also the team's obvious bad blood between William Beck and the team's talented but thoroughly disagreeable manager, probably the greatest right-handed hitter of all time, Rogers Hornsby. Now, the Sporting News, as you can see here, pointed out that the Cubs season provided them with 5 wild weeks of a succession of buried thrills. And tops on the list of both the Tribune and the Sporting News was the July 6th shooting of their star shortstop, Billy Jurges, as the Sporting News put it here, an episode of unrequited love. Okay. Now, wow, as you can see here, the sensational shooting of a popular baseball player by his former lover, Popovich was her name, immediately captured the public's attention, and everyone wanted to know exactly what went on, what had gone on in room 509 of Chicago's Hotel Carlos. And just a few hours after reporters first heard the news, Chicago's Daily Illustrated Times and the Chicago Daily News, both afternoon papers, were out on the streets with, as you can see here, with banner headlines. And by the way, see the lower paper here, the Daily Illustrated Times. The entire headline, with the second part, the smaller type, not shown here, reads, well, the whole headline was, Bill Jurges shot ... by spurned cabaret girl. Note the subtitle of the Daily News headline, the girl wounded in hotel mystery, both will live. The Associated Press carried the news across the country, reporting that, quote, a woman scorned almost took the life of Bill Jurges, star shortstop of the Chicago National Baseball League. Okay, let me pause for just a second. Okay, you might not now be wondering what led me to this story. Okay, and I grew up outside of Chicago in Aurora, Illinois, my hometown. That's me and the Cubs shirt right over there. And I've enjoyed researching and writing for many, many years. After finishing several books about literary figures, mostly for academic publishers, I wanted something entirely different to work on. And after learning that little had been written about the Cubs' early years, before they were called the Cubs, I immersed myself in newspaper articles, memoirs, archival records, other original sources to tell that story. Now, while working on my Cubs book, I had read about the shooting incident and a few Cubs histories, but the authors provided really not much information at all, besides a few cursory comments here and there. And since I felt that that story made the Cubs season particularly intriguing, I set out to find additional details about this dramatic confrontation in Jurges's hotel room. Okay, I love the cover of my book, by the way. It's that bottom photograph. I'm going to discuss that a little bit. It's my favorite photograph in the whole book, in fact. Now, information about Billy's life seemed readily available. But what about Violet's background? What about her childhood? What about her family? And what did she do with her life? After the excitement died down and newspapers turned to other stories. And of course, what happened to the Cubs and the rest of their 1932 season, a season made famous by Babe Ruth's dramatic called shot home run during the Cubs-Yankees World Series. Maybe unarguably, probably the greatest home run in baseball history. At least it's the most dramatic home run with all the repercussions going on, which I'm going to get to in just a little bit. Now, slowly the details began to emerge when I started doing all these research, and I immersed myself in all this primary research material. The Chicago History Museum has the records of the orphanage where Violet and her brother stayed for a few years. I found out information not only about them, but also about their father's lack of both child and emotional support. In fact, I came across a letter in the Chicago History Museum that said the father wanted to take one of the brothers home with him, but the boy refused, and he told the administrator. In fact, the letter is from the administrator, and he remarked that the boy told him, no, sir, I do not want to leave. This place is the only real home I've ever known in my entire life. Which was just really rather sobering when I read that letter. Now, newspaper articles provided both day-by-day coverage and interviews with Billy, with Violet, and others. In fact, I went through all the Chicago newspapers page by page on microfilm, since very few of them were available online. The Tribune was, I have newspapers.com, but didn't cover any of the Chicago papers for this time. So I got them all on microfilm and spent about a good 3 years going through every single one of them page by page on microfilm. I interview and these newspaper articles provided day-by-day coverage and also interviews with Billy, with Violet, with newspaper baseball players who came to Billy's aid in the motel room. Chicago court records, a skilled genealogist in Chicago found those for me. They were invaluable. Violet's father was physically abusive to his wife, and there was a long, drawn-out divorce. In fact, Violet had to testify at the divorce at the tender age of 8. So you can see how all this kind of affected her psyche here, so to speak. I was also able to interview and correspond with Billy and Violet's family members, Violet's 2 nephews, and also Billy's daughter and Billy's grandson. I got to talk to both of them. They answered many questions. So I got lucky in that respect. So today, I want to talk about the shooting of Billy by his former girlfriend, her court hearing, and a few more details about her life, including her early, rather unhappy years. I'll discuss the 1932 Cubs, profile Billy's life, and then sum everything up. And along the way, I'm going to show you quite a few photographs, very interesting photographs, including family photographs of Violet that are in my book and have never before been published. So, okay. Now, on July 1st, 1932, the Chicago Cubs were in first place in the National League, and they were in the thick of a tight pennant race. And a player who was contributing to the Cubs' success was 24-year-old shortstop Billy Jurges. Well, 21-year-old Violet Popovich whose stage name was Violet Valley, she would soon put a stop to all this just a few days later. Billy and a few of the other Cubs players were staying at the Hotel Carlos, just a couple of blocks north of Wrigley Field on Sheffield Avenue. It's still standing there today. And on the morning of July 6th, Billy was getting ready for a game with the Philadelphia Phillies, and the Cubs were now in third place, 3 games behind the Pirates. At about 9:45 in the morning, Violet called him from her room. She had a room too in the Hotel Carlos, and said she wanted to see him. And he told her, well, come on up. And about 10:15, she knocked on his door, room 509. In fact, Billy's room was right here, the top floor, far right, overlooking the street. In fact, I have a website, wrigleyivy.com, and I had a whole lot about my research on it. And out of the blue, someone who had stayed in room 509 contacted me, and we had a spirited discussion about all this. And he was one who told me that this up here was Billy's room, and he even sent me a photograph of the room and the 509 nameplate on the number plate on the door. Okay, Billy and Bottle had been going out for about a year, but he had recently called things off, and they had a big argument. He told her that they had a chance to go for the pennant. He wanted to take a break from things and concentrate more on baseball. Also, he was young, good looking, single in a nice town like Chicago. He didn't really say so, but I got the impression he wanted to kind of have a good time. In fact, he made a comment one time in an interview that he really wanted to have a good time while he was playing baseball. So I think that has something to do with it too. Anyway, he had called things off, and they had a big argument. She wanted to talk about it, and they ended up arguing some more. And she asked him for a glass of water, and he left the room to get it. Well, this is a bad career move, shall we say, on Billy's part. And there we go. While he was getting it, she pulled a small caliber revolver from her purse, and the New York Times wrote that as soon as he saw the gun, he made a wild lunge for the gun. And in the ensuing struggle, as they say in the movies, 3 shots rang out. And here's where those 3 shots went. One bullet struck him in the right side, ricocheted off a rib, and came out his right shoulder. In fact, hitting that rib undoubtedly saved his life, the doctor said. It would have definitely hit an internal organ if not for that. Another one grazed a little finger of his left hand. The third bullet struck Violet at about the base of her wrist, I guess, and went up arm about 6 inches. As luck would have it, the Cubs team physician happened to be in the hotel. He happened to be nearby. They were both treated at a local hospital. Now, the Chicago newspapers, as they say nowadays, pounced on this story, and it went viral. It was also somewhat sensational. Violet was, quote, the dark-haired former chorus girl, the pretty gun-toter, the 21-year-old comely brunette, and my favorite, the raven-tressed beauty. Photographers even barged into her hospital room to take pictures. And this picture is not in my book. In fact, these are all wire photos that I have in my collection that I'll be showing you. This one is not in my book. I thought it was a little bit too invasive, but it was all over the newspapers. The photographers barged into her room to take this picture. Note her bandage on her left arm there. And the caption of this photograph is, quote, Violet dislikes camera, and with a note that, quote, Bill Jurges, whom she plugged, was in another room. She stayed in the Illinois Masonic Hospital for a couple of days, and here she is leaving for the Bridewell Hospital right next to the Cook County Jail, and she was booked on a charge of assault with intent to kill. Note that her arm is still bandaged. That's a police matron walking there ahead of her. In the meantime, the police searched her hotel room and found these 2 pictures there in her hotel room. They also found a note addressed to her brother in which she said, quote, to me, life without Billy isn't worth living. But why should I leave this earth alone? I'm going to take Billy with me. No, sounds kind of ominous, don't you think? Later, though, she said that note was the result of too much gin, never happened, no, and she only wanted to kill herself to make Billy sorry for breaking up with her. She said in an interview that when Billy was out of the room getting her that glass of water, quote, I pulled out my revolver, intending to kill myself. Bill saw me and grabbed the gun. We fought for it. We really fought for it. The gun kept exploding, but I didn't really want to hurt him. Now, but though, remember that letter, though, when she said that she wanted to take Billy with her, that comes up again. Okay, so there's 2 different stories here. Now, Violet made the newspapers almost daily, particularly on July 15th, the day of her arraignment. The Chicago American said that when she entered the courtroom with her attorneys, quote, the crowd gasped at her radiant beauty. The Daily Illustrated Times wrote that she was, quote, a symphony in red and white with her red earrings, her red shoes, and her red striped trimmings on her white crepe sports dress, exactly matching her shade of lipstick. And by the way, note her bandaged left arm here. And I love this picture. In fact, this is probably my second favorite photograph in the whole book. And a newspaper reporter found this buried away in some files that had never, ever been published. He gave me the original negative, one of those, 4x4 negatives, and the original old-fashioned, brown cardboard sleeve and everything. And a book on the call shot came out a couple of years ago, and I lent him the photograph, so it appeared there. But after that, this is the first time it's ever been published, and it's the only quote unquote full body shot about it at that time that I've ever seen before. So let me stop for a minute too. And I found out later that these two attorneys are really high-priced attorneys. And somebody once asked me, well, how could Bartlett afford these attorneys? And I didn't really know. I know her bail bond was posted by a church member, but somebody later told me that his father had been a court reporter in Chicago in about the 1930s, and he handled a lot of famous cases, including he covered the Lindbergh baby trial as well as some other ones. And he told me that a lot of times newspapers would pay lawyer fees in return for getting a good story. And I went back and checked all my files and my papers, and Bada was interviewed for a lot of papers, so I couldn't isolate which one, but that was a good thought, though. It's probably true that some newspaper paid these two men for their services. Now the judge, this gets curiouser and curiouser, as they say, in Alice in Wonderland. Now the judge, John Sabarbaro, was not only an attorney and judge, but he was also the ultimate political fixer. He ran a mortuary favored by Chicago's mobsters who used his garage as a drop-off spot for illegal booze. So he was a bit on the take. In fact, I think in Chicago there's a building named for him. In fact, a Chicago Al Capone biographer said that when he wasn't putting mobsters in jail, he was putting them in coffins. In fact, in the late 1920s, his mortuary was bombed by Chicago gangsters on another gang who he wasn't keeping their liquor in his garage. And when reporters asked, "Well, Judge, who bombed your place?" their eyes started rolling when he said, "Well, I don't know. I've been giving out some hard sentences lately. Maybe one of them did it." No. It was gangsters who did it because of the booze. He was also a Cubs fan. He, like Billy, and like the Cubs, all wanted this thing to quietly go away. In fact, the judge asked Billy, "Hey, Billy," beforehand, "Hey, Billy, what do you want me to do with all this?" He said, "Hey, Judge, let's forget the whole thing." So Billy refused to press charges. The judge dismissed the case. And I love this photograph. I have the original of this photograph too. I love the way Bada's looking at one of her attorneys rather demurely there. Notice a packed courtroom. Bada's mother's there. Her showgirl friends are back in there someplace. Some of Billy's ball player friends are there. Billy, by the way, is not blowing his nose. He is hiding his face from all the cameras that are there. And everything. Look, they're about 3 feet away and not even speaking to each other. And then in my book, by the way, I discussed the whole courtroom hearing and exactly what went on. Now, this was July 15th. On July 22nd, Billy was shot on the July 6th, had this arraignment on July 15th. And on July 22nd, he felt well enough to take the field in a game against the Pittsburgh Pirates. He played third base instead of shortstop, as he would have less stretching to do. And the Cubs lost 3-1, but as one newspaper reported, quote, Bill Jurges, a celebrated revolver target, bowed himself back into his profession by socking a single to center. Now, now it's going to get really interesting. Although Billy refused Tucson complained against Violet, she decided to capitalize on her newfound fame by signing a contract to perform under her stage name, Violet Valley, in her burlesque show, singing in her burlesque show as you can see here, the girl who shot for love. The State Congress Theater was a burlesque club on South State Street in a rather seedy area known for its rundown rooming houses and hotels, its rather dingy saloons, pool halls, and burlesque theaters. And interestingly enough, the same day newspapers reported on Billy's return to the baseball field, Violet returned to the stage as a singer. And management did its part to attract an audience by booking some, quote, Bear Cub girls as her opening act. And I don't mean B-E-A-R, as you can see by the headline, Bear Cub Follies here. I told you I went through all the newspapers page by page, and I turned one page on microfilm, and I turned one page and found this ad right here. And I love this ad. It mentions the Bear Cub frolics here, but I really think it was called Bear Cub Follies. Other newspapers call it that way. And look at her Bear Cub girls down there at the bottom, and the greatest burlesque show ever presented. Now, of course, I was going through all these papers that I would love to find a review of this, and I want to find a review. What went on in the burlesque show? You know, did Violet take her clothes off? Did other people take their clothes off? What all went happen? So by going through the Chicago Daily News, which was not available online, I turned the page and there was a detailed review written by one of the editors of the paper and a well-known person in Chicago at that time anyway. And he talked about what exactly went on a burlesque show and the degree of nudity depended upon how much applause each girl got. The more applause, the more clothes that were taken off. It was written by Lloyd Lewis, a respected editor of the paper who knew all the city notables at the time. And he lived in a house designed by his pal, Frank Lloyd Wright, on the Des Plaines River. And Lewis said that after the hour-long Bear Cub Girls act, she went on stage and sang a popular love song of the day. And it's just a so-so voice, she said. Not bad, he said, not bad, but not good. A so-so voice, quote, a quiet little voice. And after she ended the song, he wrote that the patrons, the stage hands in their undershirts, they're all waiting for her to take her clothes off. But he says, quote, she does not. She merely walks off bowing. There are a few scattering hand claps. She takes a bow, then retires without a single gesture of salaciousness. Violet's nephew told me that her singing career didn't exactly take off. This show was supposed to last for about 6 weeks in and around the Chicago area. It lasted maybe 2-3 weeks. And her nephew told me that her lack of success may have stemmed from her lack of talent. She liked to sing, he told me. That is, she tried to sing. Violet had other problems too. She was soon back in the news. In Judge Sabarborough's courtroom too, after a bail bondsman, a part-time real estate agent, a full-time hustler and con man, stole her Billy Jurges love letters, saying he wanted to publish them in ballparks around the country under the title Love Letters of a Shortstop, and sell copies at ballparks around the country. As it turned out, what he really wanted to do was blackmail Billy, a scheme that didn't work. After all this was settled, Violet got her letters back. She was soon back in the stage, and in the 1930s, just excuse me a minute, she was singing sentimental love songs at the Kitty Davis Cocktail Lounge here in Chicago. She was also seeing this man, Fred Williams, who worked in his father's hardware factory. They applied for a marriage license, never did get married. And by 1940, Violet and her mother were moved from Chicago and were living in Los Angeles. Now, a few years ago, Violet's nephew, Mark Prescott, the son of her brother, Mark, learned of my research and contacted me. He offered family photographs, personal insights, and with some more research on my part, additional details emerged about the sad, strange saga of Violet Popovich. And these details also provided insights into what may have led to her decision to confront Billy in his hotel room on July 6, 1932, and swiftly pull a gun from her purse. And by the way, I love this photograph. It's probably my favorite photograph of her. She looks so innocent and sweet and just like a nice person. The Cubs historian who helped me a lot with this, and I got to know him really well, he said, well, Jack, remember though, she may look innocent, but remember, she pulled that gun out of her purse. We had a good time talking about that.
I have a question that popped up.
Sure.
I'm throwing it in here now because it refers to a slide you had up. Is there a reason why they show temperature on the poster when they were talking about the burlesque show? Was it because of the type of show, or was it because of the date and it was rare to have air conditioning?
It was the air conditioning thing, I think. Is that the one you mean?
That's what I thought, but I think that was, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it was the air. They made a big deal about how cool it was. Yeah, that's it.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, when I found out, well, go and look at some of these ads, they always made a big deal if theaters were air conditioned. And so that's why I think that's it. That answer your question, honey? I'm sorry, I keep looking over there because you're over here, but the camera's over here. Okay. About his father was named Mirko Mike Popovich. He was an Austrian immigrant who arrived at Ellis Island in 1907. He was an electrician by trade, but he moved to Chicago, and in 1910 he married Margaret Heindel, also from Austria. They had 4 children, of which Violet was the oldest, born in 1911. The marriage was not a happy one. When Violet was only 10 days old, her father started beating her mother, giving her black and blue eyes. The couple got divorced in 1920 on the grounds of, quote, extreme and repeated cruelty. In fact, 8-year-old Violet even had to testify at the divorce hearing. Now, child support was slow in coming, despite Michael Popovich's steady income. And for a few years, Margaret was forced to have her children stay in the Ulick Children's Home in Chicago, run by the Lutheran Church. Violet dislikes living in the orphanage, and in 1926, shortly before her 15th birthday, she told the administrator she was 18 and wanted to leave. And apparently no one verified her age, and she went home to live with her mother. She left the orphanage to go live with her mother. But 4 months later, she probably regretted her decision because she ran away from home after her mother punished her for staying out late. The police were called to find her, and Violet consequently made her very first appearance in the Chicago Daily Tribune. Violet said in interviews that she was married at a young age, but that it was a very short marriage. Quote, I was unhappily married at 18, she said, one of those puppy love affairs with a schoolboy. I never lived with him, and we were divorced 6 months later. Right after her divorce, she enrolled in a dancing school. And in the early 1930s, she joined the chorus of a Chicago production of Vanities, which was an annual musical produced by the New Yorker Earl Carroll, who at that time was quite famous around the country, in fact, for his elaborate shows and scantily clad showgirls. The souvenir pamphlet shown here notes that the show was, quote, there at the very bottom, America's greatest review, and, quote, through these portals past the most beautiful girls in the world. In the summer of 1931, she met Billy Jurges. As she said in an interview, quote, Bill is a boy and 100,000 for me. I met him at a party, and if it wasn't love at first sight, it was just about second. A year later, the two of them had their dramatic meeting at the Hotel Carlos. She sang in the burlesque show. She sang at nightclubs, and eventually, as I said, moved to Los Angeles. Okay, we'll continue with Violet, but let's get back to Billy and the Cubs for a while. And here are the team's infielders, Woody English, Billy Herman, Charlie Grimm, Stan Hack, and then Billy Jurges is at the far right. Woody and Stan Hack played third base. Billy Herman, the second from the left, was at second base. Charlie Grimm, the manager, was at first base. Now, as I said, Billy rejoined the team on July 22nd, and after their loss to Pittsburgh that day, they found themselves 3.5 games behind the Pittsburgh Pirates, the leading Pirates. And everyone was under an awful lot of stress. And on top of that, there were all these whispered comments within the Cubs organization, which centered on the obvious animosity between the Cubs president, William Beck, and their manager, Rogers Hornsby. Now, Beck believed that the team was easily good enough to win the National League pennant. He was really growing pretty sick and tired of Hornsby's constant complaining about the team, about the men and their alleged shortcomings. And the players too, it really had little use for Hornsby. Quote, he was one of the greatest hitters of all time, maybe the greatest, said second baseman Rogers Hornsby, and future Hall of Famer. But he never talked hitting with us. He just expected you to go up there and do it. Things continued to get worse. A loss to the Brooklyn Dodgers on August 2nd put the Cubs 5 games behind the first place Pirates. And that evening, Beck fired Hornsby and appointed as manager the popular first baseman and team captain Charlie Grimm. Now, Grimm lived up to his nickname, Jolly Charlie, and the team really flourished under his easygoing, even-tempered leadership style. As Billy Herman said, quote, he just let everybody go their own way. No rules, no curfews. He ran the game on the field, of course, but away from it, he was just one happy-go-lucky guy. Now, Cub President William Beck was concerned about Billy's recovery right after the shooting. Moreover, there was a loss of player-manager Rogers Hornsby, so Beck brought in infielder Mark Koenig to help out in the shortstop. He used to play with the Yankees. He proved to be an excellent choice, and he helped the Cubs clinch the National League pennant on September 20th. But all in all, it was a tough season for the Cubs. It was, quote, just one thing after another, wrote the Chicago Daily Tribune, including the well-publicized dismissal of manager Rogers Hornsby, the shooting of Billy Jurges, and even some unfounded charges against by the Chicago Daily News, charged by the Chicago Daily News of horse race betting and gambling among the players, which was not true at all. But through it all, the Cubs managed to prevail, due in large part to the hitting in the field of Mark Koenig. He batted .353 during the 33 games he played for the Cubs from August 14th to the end of the season on September 25. Okay, now each team would get a share of the World Series gate receipts, and the players got to vote on how much each person got. And it had to be a unanimous vote to get a full share of the World Series bonus. And two players, Billy Herman and Billy Jurges, voted only to give Mark Koenig a half a share, as he played in just the last part of the season, 33 games. In fact, there were 154 games total. Billy Jurges, as a comparison, played in 115 of those 154 games. Mark Koenig played in 33, but he definitely helped the team win the pennant. The New York Yankees, the Cubs, Koenig's former team and the Cubs World Series opponents, saw things differently. And when the newspapers announced the World Series breakdown, the Yankees, and Babe Ruth especially, blasted the Cubs as cheapskates and penny pinchers. Quote from Babe Ruth, I hope we beat them 4 straight. He said in an interview, they gave Koenig a sour deal in his player cut. They're chiselers, and I tell them so. Now, as famed Washington Post sports writer Shirley Povich, the father of talk show host Maury Povich, wrote, quote, the Cubs' stinginess fired the Yankees to new heights. Now, the Cubs were down 2-0 in the World Series when Game 3 was played in Chicago. Insults have been flying back and forth among the teams during the World Series. It was called bench jockeying back then, and there were a lot of insults, really mean, terrible insults flying between the two teams. In the 5th inning, now the Cubs were down 2-0 in the World Series. Game 3 was played in Chicago, as I said. In the 5th inning, the score was tied 4-4. Ruth was at the plate facing pitcher Charlie Root with a count of 2 balls, 2 strikes, and Babe Ruth raised 2 fingers of his right hand. Did he signal that that was only 2 strikes? Did he gesture contemptuously to the Cubs in the third base dugout, or to pitcher Charlie Root? Or did he point to center field as if to signal that he was going to hit a home run? That is, did he call his shot? Now, what person saw it depended upon where they were sitting and the angle of the view. And even the home movies taken at that time really were of little help, even though Ruth biographers pointed that out. In any case, Babe Ruth did indeed hit a home run, and Lou Gehrig followed that with a home run of his own, and the Cubs lost that game 7-5, and the following game too. and the thoroughly demoralized Cubs lost the whole World Series 4-0, just as Babe Ruth had hoped. Now, of course, whether or not Babe Ruth called his shot has been debated ever since October 1, 1932. Entire books have been written about this one play. And I go into this in some detail in my book, and I don't have time to talk about it now. As I said, whole books have been written about it. But one thing I did find out, that opinions about whether he did or didn't point do not fall along partisan lines, not at all. I have found Cubs, particularly Guy Bush, the pitcher, who was probably Ruth's main heckler, who emphatically maintained that Babe Ruth pointed to center field. But I also found Yankees who just as emphatically said, no, he didn't point. That was just, we just knew that was a good story, and we all kept mum about it. He didn't point at all. Reporters picked up on it after Joe Williams of the World Telegram noted in his headline here, Ruth calls shot as he puts homer number 2 in the side pocket. And that's really where the story got a lot of steam. I know that. But again, we have people on both sides saying he did or he didn't. Now, according to the hard-nosed Charlie Root, who brooked no interference when it came to this, he said that if Ruth had tried to show him up by pointing to outfield and signaling where he was going to hit that ball, quote, anybody who knows me knows that Ruth would have ended up on his ass, unquote. Charlie Root, by the way, as I said, brooked no interference on this topic. He was offered a large fee to play himself in the movie, The Babe Ruth Story, but he refused, saying, quote, not if they're going to show him pointing, and which they did, which was an awful movie, by the way. And during a Root family outing one day, everybody was playing a game of wiffle ball, and Charlie Root was pitching. Charlie Jr.'s wife was at bat, and she made the mistake of taking a wiffle ball bat and pointing to center field. And immediately old Charlie Root wound up and hit her in the neck with the wiffle ball, knocking her to the ground. The subject bothered him his whole life, and he told his his daughter, shortly before he died, quote, I gave my life to baseball, but I will only be remembered for something that never ever happened. Other players, such as the Cubs infielder Woody English, felt the same way, but to my way of thinking, though, the Cubs historian and other people, doesn't really any of it really matter. Whatever happened, only Babe Ruth and his extraordinary power and his charismatic presence could have transformed a few moments of baseball into American legend. As even Charlie Grimm said, quote, a great guy hit that homer, probably the greatest slugger of all time. After Violet shot Billy, he remarked that, quote, I guess I'll remain a bachelor all my life. He soon changed his mind, though, and on June 28, 1933, in Reading, Pennsylvania, he married Mary Hoyt of nearby Birdsboro. And one sports writer felt that she must have provided him with inspiration, as later on that day, he celebrated his wedding day with 6 hits and a Cubs doubleheader, including a home run, and the Cubs won both games. By the way, this is an original wire photo. I gave this, as well as some other documents I had, to Billy's grandson. I also discussed the rest of Billy's career in my book, including his rather disastrous 1959 and 1960 seasons as manager of the Chicago Red Sox. When you become a manager, Billy later said in an interview, told an interviewer, you have to have a team that is coming up. All of my players were on the way down, and there was not much I could do there. They were all retiring. One of those Cubs players was the mighty left fielder Ted Williams, who in fact retired in 1960 and couldn't help Billy much. He and Jurges got along well, but they were both hardworking and they hustled. But in the late 1950s, hustling was not really part of the Red Sox vocabulary. A decided air of complacency had surrounded the team. The Christian Science Monitor of Boston printed an article in which an anonymous ball player said, quote, this club needs shaking up. It was reported to be Jackie Jensen, no small hustler himself, who in 1959 led the American League with 112 runs batted in. He was a right fielder. In 1960, unfortunately, he announced his retirement himself. The club didn't need shaking up. Billy tried his best, but he was let go in June 1960 with a disappointing major league managerial record of only 59 wins and 63 losses. He did enter baseball history, though, in July 1959 when infielder Pumpsie Green became the first African-American to play for the Red Sox, thereby integrating all the major league teams. Billy finished his career as a well-respected scout and an instructor, not only helping young players learn new baseball skills, but also instilling in them his intense drive and passion for the game. He was very well-respected baseball scout. Two ball players who later entered the Hall of Fame credited him with his instruction. Eddie Matthews, third baseman for the Boston Braves, Harmon Killebrew, a slugger for the Minnesota Twins. Billy quit the baseball life in the early 1980s to take care of his ailing wife, Mary, who died in 84. Several years later, Billy remarried, and as he put it, he and his wife, Phyllis, enjoyed the good life in Lago, Florida. There was a park near their house. They dance, they play horseshoes. He would visit with ball players who lived nearby. He'd socialize with other ball players at various functions. Billy was not a powerful hitter, but he compensated for that with his solid defensive skills. He played 17 years in the major leagues from 1931 to 1947. He led the National League shortstops in fielding percentage 4 times, 1932, 35, 37, 39. Also once in double plays turn, 1935. He batted .258 in 1,816 games. He got 1,613 hits. He was with the Cubs from 31 to 38, and then he was the New York Giants, and then back to the Cubs, where he finished out his career. Cubs, Giants, good year or bad year, he said. I've never failed to do my best to play out to the limit. Baseball has done well by me. I've done all I could for baseball. Billy was diagnosed with cancer in 1991. He entered the hospital in early 1997 and died a few weeks later on March 3rd at age 88. I interviewed Billy's grandson and also his daughter, and I asked her if she knew, I asked with some hesitation, do you know that your father got shot by his former lover in 1932? She said she was familiar with the incident, but it was never mentioned in their house. And her direct quote was, quote, "It was never mentioned in our house, never," emphatically never. As I said, by 1940, Violet and her mother, Margaret Heindel, had moved from Chicago, settled in Los Angeles, California. Violet always considered herself a professional singer and had these photographs taken of herself to try to get back on the stage. I love the one of her in the cape and the shorts there. Unfortunately, despite the glamour shots, she had few opportunities for launching a West Coast singing career. She was a city person, and her marriage to Charlie Retzlaff in 1947, a prize fighter from Duluth, Minnesota, was probably doomed from the start. He was known as the Duluth Dynamiter. He was regarded as a good fighter until he met a young boxer in 1936 who knocked him out in the first round. That probably was not surprising, for as a boxer was a young Joe Louis, who later would be crowned the heavyweight champion of the world. Her marriage to Charlie did not last long, but they did not divorce. They remained friends. She was certainly not at a loss for other male friends. She once caught the eye of motion picture star John Wayne, who struck up a conversation with Violet at a cocktail lounge near where she worked in the color film department of a film studio, and he drove her home. She told her nephew, who told me that, well, first of all, John Wayne was not known for keeping his marriage vows sacred, shall we say. And so he had hopes of coming inside to Violet's home, which is the reason he drove her home. He wanted to get comfortable and stay a while, but those hopes were soon dashed by the presence of her mother, who was waiting up for Violet. So John Wayne had to turn around and go home. Violet dated baseball player Leo Durocher in the 1930s, who later became manager of the Chicago Cubs. She also dated Al Lopez in the 1930s and also in the 1960s when he was manager of the Chicago White Sox. Okay, folks. So if you have friends who say they are baseball trivia experts, ask them this question. What former showgirl went out with two Hall of Famers who were managers of the two Chicago professional baseball teams? Violet's two nephews shared stories with me about their aunt. One of them remarked that Violet, quote, was easygoing and upbeat. She was never depressed, never melancholy. She had friends. She was sociable. Her interests were baseball and movies. She struck me as a very normal person, and I had no idea she had shot the 1932 Chicago Cubs shortstop. She spent her final years in a nursing home. She did not have much money, but she made up for it with her upbeat attitude, her cheerful spirits, and she regaled residents and staff with stories of her showgirl past. She died in 2000. She was buried in Los Angeles's Forest Lawn Memorial Cemetery in Hollywood Hills. She was 88 when she died, just like Billy. I'm going to wrap things up here a little bit. I discussed in my book that, like Violet, the Hotel Carlos had a share of tough times. And over the years, the residential hotel gradually fell into disrepair. You can see the air conditioner up there in the upper left. Trim's falling apart. That looks like it's coming apart over there. This stuff over there looks kind of bad. His name was changed to the Sheffield House Hotel. You can see Sheffield House right over here. There's Billy's room right up there. Though the building retained that imposing Hotel Carlos on the entryway there. As urban renewal and gentrification altered America's cityscape, the Sheffield and others, what these are called single room occupancy hotels, were either torn down or repurposed. A real estate company purchased a hotel and completely remodeled it and renamed it 3834 North Sheffield. There it is right there. I had this photograph taken a few years ago. There's Billy's room right there still. According to his webpage, right on there right now, the property was, quote, a once hip apartment hotel for Cubs players. But it now offered studio apartments to upscale professionals. And the owners announced that the new hardwood floors, the granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, quote, modernize the gorgeous vintage details that remain from a glorious and distant area. Just two more things as I wrap this up, everybody. In 1949, 19-year-old Chicagoan Ruth Ann Steinhagen, who had to quote the New York Times, a twisted fascination with former Cub and then Philadelphia Philly Eddie Waitkus, shot him in his hotel room at Chicago's Edgewater Beach Hotel. Ironically now, and this is amazing, Eddie and Billy had both played together for 2 years, and Eddie had hit a double in Billy's last game on September 9th, 1947. So I wonder, they must have talked at some point after Eddie got shot. You know, they must have had to compare notes, I think. Now, author Bernard Malamud never ever mentioned where he got his source material, but it seems likely that one or both of these shootings inspired him to include a passage in his 1952 novel, The Natural, in which a woman shoots ball player Roy Hobbs. And The Natural and that scene continue to live on today, thanks to the hit 1984 motion picture starring Robert Redford as Hobbs. By the way, Ruth Steinhagen died in 2012, but her death went unnoticed for a few weeks before reporters even noticed it. And I researched that shooting too, and I tried to contact Ruth. I had her phone number, I had her address. No way was I going to call her. I didn't have the nerve to call her. In fact, she lived with her sister, and I would have no idea which one of them I would be talking to. Because Eddie's biographer said he came across that problem when he knocked on her door. He didn't know which one he was talking to for sure. But anyway, I wrote it 3 times. She never wrote back, not surprisingly. Now, one more question needs to be answered before I wrap this up. Did Violet really intend to kill Billy when she burst into his room? Remember, she left a note saying that that was her intention and that I'm going to take Billy with me. But after the shooting, she said, no, I only wanted to kill myself to make Billy sorry for breaking up with me. Well, she lied. Mark Prescott, Violet's nephew, told me that she had confided to his mother, Violet's sister-in-law, that she had indeed gone to that hotel room with the express purpose, she went there to room 509 with a gun in her purse with the express purpose of shooting Billy Jurges. And she told his mother, quote, I was very angry at Billy and I wanted to kill him, unquote. Here's my book with a foreword by Tim Wiles, the former research director at the Baseball Hall of Fame. I have my email address there in red. I had book plates made that feature the image, the book's image here. The cover of the book is on the book plate. And if anybody buys the book and wants to copy the book plate, I'll be happy to sign it, inscribe it to you any way you want to, and send it to you. Just no charge, just email me and I'll have one in the mail immediately. jbales@umw.edu. UMW stands for University of Mary Washington, where I was a librarian for more than 40 years. Now let me end this on something of a light note. Now I've enjoyed all this research and writing a great deal. I had a marvelous time immersing myself in newspaper articles and court records and interviewing both Billy and Violet family members. And some time ago, I decided to even make Violet part of my family Christmas card with me and my son and my daughter. So here's my Christmas card one year. And note the bandage on Violet's arm, and on it says, Violet, I hope you feel better soon. Go Cubs, Jack. Thank you very much. Right on time. I'm going to hit escape here.
That was that Christmas card is great.
I love that Christmas card. Yeah. Now, I told this to the Cubs historian, Ed Hardig, who was quoted as that place was a dive. And he kind of sighed in an email, Jack, you got to take a break from this, do something else. Push yourself away from the microphone a little bit, go out and take a walk, he got a big kick out of all this.
That was fascinating.
Thank you very much, Penny. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? We are wide open for questions here. If you want to stop your screen share, they'll just see us.
Yeah, good idea. They'll just see me here. There we go. Okay, there we go. Right there. Now they'll just see me.
Yeah. So anyone with any questions, let's hear anything or see anything.
Thank you very much for attending, by the way.
Yeah. And thank you for doing this. It was really interesting. The photos were incredible.
I love the photos. Yeah.
Yeah. You great shots there. She was a beautiful woman.
She was. In fact, when Billy was interviewed in 1988, I can't remember when it was. He was interviewed, but that was an exact quote in his book. He said, I was seeing her. Other people were going out with her, and quote, he said, she was a beautiful woman. The one nephew I interviewed quite a bit, he emphasized that too. He said, well, Jack, she was gorgeous. You can see why people were interested in her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was doing a little bit of this research about at that time before she died, and I wish I had known, I could have known about her then. I would love to have interviewed her.
One question, do you have any other story in the works or a subject or person that you would be interested in writing about because they say this was a wonderful program and they didn't know the story?
Yeah. Another topic of research, is that it?
Yeah.
Any I have one on one of the Cubs early, one of the National League's not founders, but he helped the founder of the National League, who was a Chicago Tribune sports writer. His name was Lewis Meacham. Nothing's really been done on him. I'm kind of interested with that. It's not as racy as Violet is or anything, but I am going to start working on that. Right now, I'm really having a great time promoting this promoting this book. I've given Zoom presentations to baseball chapters of the Society of American Baseball Research all over the country. I'm going to be speaking in person in Quincy, Illinois in a couple of weeks at the Quincy Historical Society. And then the Brookfield, Illinois Public Library is having a community read of the book in
Oh,
August.
really? Oh,
Yes, and
that's fun.
it's going to, I think it's August 14th. And so I hope, Penny, I can give you some information. Maybe down the road you can help publicize it or something.
Yeah.
So I'm going to
Yeah,
go there
please.
in person. They want to make a whole big deal of it. I'll talk and sign books, and I told them, so look, you guys are doing all this work. Whatever you want, I'll be glad to do. You know, I'm
That
not one
sounds
of,
like fun.
it is going to be fun. I'm not one of those temperamental authors. And I've had where I've worked, I've had some name authors come and some name people come by to visit. And some of them are really temperamental, you know. I remember one person, you could barely looked at me as I was trying to ask a question. I told these people, I'm not that way. Whatever you guys want, I'll be glad to do, you know.
That sounds like that's a really great idea. It sounds
Yeah,
like
it's the Brookfield Public Library right near Brookfield too, I guess, you know. But they call it a community read and everything. So that'll be kind of fun. I've always wanted to do something like that. There was one bottle story I didn't tell that I didn't know if I have enough time. But, you know, I mentioned her boxing husband, Mark Prescott, the nephew, told me that I think it was 1962. Vada and Charlie Retzlaff were at their family home for Thanksgiving dinner. And Vada cheerfully told the people at the dinner table that she and Charlie had spent the afternoon sunbathing nude. And Mark said that Charlie was embarrassed, my father was furious, and words went flying. Yeah.
Any other questions before we let Mr. Bales go?
Thanks very much, everybody. I thoroughly enjoyed this. You can see it's just a great story. You know, you can't beat the story.
And I actually did go and look up that hotel to see what the pictures were.
Yeah.
But I don't think I saw it when it was in its decline. It was more of when it was, you know, back in the 30s.
I emailed Ed Harding, the Cubs historian, all the time, and he was the one who told me that. He said, Jack, I walk by that place every day on the way to work, and I said, he gave the comment, the place is a dive. He said, people going by would cross to the other side of the street, you know, rather than walk in front of it. It was like one of those one-day rental type places. It's called a single room occupancy, or I think was the type of the name for it, SRO or something like that. I think it was SRO house, where you could rent rooms by the day, by the week, by the month, or whatever.
Well, I don't see any other questions coming in. So thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Let me applaud you for showing up. You know, I enjoyed
thank
it
you
a
all
lot.
for coming.
Okay.
And